These mountains of white powder are the foundation of an international multi-billion-dollar industry, asbestos. Worldwide production has topped 3 million tons annually. After World War II, asbestos use took off in the defense and space industries, and the possibilities seemed limitless. Most famous as a fire protector, asbestos was woven into the fabric of our daily lives. This versatile and nearly indestructible fibre was once called the magic mineral. But it's people like these who paid the highest price for society's use of the magic mineral. I'm John Willis. Nova has brought me here to the United States to make a special presentation of a programme about asbestos that I made for British television. Not that asbestos is just a British problem, but it's something that affects us all. Indeed, much of our film was shot here in the States and in Canada. Nearly 25 million Americans have been directly exposed to the dangers of asbestos, risking serious illness. When this programme was shown in Britain last year, it provoked fierce debate about the dangers of asbestos. It challenged the British government and the asbestos industry to improve working conditions. As a result, the government lowered the maximum safe level of exposure to asbestos dust by half. But here in America, the old higher level still exists. That means that thousands or even millions of Americans are still legally exposed to levels of asbestos dust that are now considered far too dangerous in Britain. We are presenting this programme to draw attention to a problem that is now of worldwide concern. Our story begins in a mining town in Canada that's actually called Asbestos. These Canadian mines supply over half the Western world's white asbestos, including most of the 95,000 tons imported into Britain every year. There are three main types of asbestos, but the white, or chrysotile, is the most commonly used both in Britain and America. Mining is on a massive scale. Asbestos in Canada is big business. Exports are worth $600 million a year. 70% of all asbestos used is in the construction industry, and it's found in over 3,000 different domestic and industrial products. Inside these rocks are veins filled with mineral fibres. In a continuous crushing and milling process, the fibres are separated from the host rock. Few other minerals are as versatile as asbestos. The fibres can reinforce cement or be woven into fire-resistant fabric. Some fibres are visible to the human eye, but it's the millions of smaller, invisible particles that are so deadly. 2 million of them could fit on a pinhead.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God.
Asbestos is killing this woman.
Please state your full name.
Too ill to go to court, lawyers have videotaped her evidence.
Can you describe how you would see the asbestos particles as they affected you?
Well, they look like snowflakes, you know, real stringy. They come down. They were pretty thick at that time.
What is it that you're presently suffering from?
And the asbestos is growing. It's all in, like grapes, all the lumps.
Since then, how has your physical condition progressed?
Look at me.
Next day, Mary Johnson died of cancer. Ray Price is suffering from asbestosis, a disease we've known about for generations. One of the 3 most prevalent causes of death associated with exposure to asbestos. It's a respiratory illness which gradually diminishes his capacity to breathe. Associated with prolonged exposure, it can take up to 20 years before the effects are felt. As his lungs become thick with scarring, Ray Price will eventually suffocate. Alice Jefferson is also dying from an asbestos-related disease. She has a rare form of cancer.
No, little flower, have you had a good day?
Alice's cancer is called mesothelioma, or cancer of the lung lining.
Are you staying there for your tea?
It's invariably fatal.
Go on then. Bye-bye.
The only established cause, the dust from asbestos. Alice is 47 years old. 30 years ago, in 1952, when she was just 17, Alice worked for 9 months at Cape Asbestos in Yorkshire, England.
Were you ever warned that working there could be dangerous, that you could finish up?
No, we used to fool about. We used to make wigs out of that. You know how you fool about at work? We used to make wigs out of asbestos and put them on our heads and, you know, no. I never thought it was dangerous at all.
Now Alice is so ill, her 65-year-old husband Tom must look after their 2 younger children, Patsy age 5 and Paul age 15. A few months ago, Alice's doctor told her she was dying of mesothelioma.
Well, I jumped round the room like a frog. I did. That's what I did. I had a feeling that I had something serious by then, you know, because I wasn't getting any better. And I just said, "You've come to tell me that I've had it, haven't you?" She said, "Yeah." And she says, I said, "How long have I got then?" And she said, 3 to 6 months. And when you think back, you know, that it's just the results of working, you know, for a paid wage. It's a job that you didn't think was dangerous. Never entered your head it was dangerous. It makes me feel right bitter. Because, I mean, I know I'm 47, but I had a little girl, you know, when I was 43, and I mean, she's only you, isn't she? And they're telling me that I've only got 6 months to live. I've a lot to feel bitter about, really. Because I suppose it's selfish, really, isn't it? Because I worry about me not being able to see their best years, you know. Seeing how Paul, you know, is my only lad. And, I mean, how Patsy's only 5. I don't know whether it's a selfish thing or not, but I think every mother wants to watch their kids develop, don't they? And I'd like to have been there and watched over them.
We asked Alan Mearns, Alice's physician, if asbestos was always the cause of mesothelioma cancer.
Personally, I feel that all mesotheliomas are related to asbestos, and it's really a question of making this connection. And I think in the past the connection wasn't widely recognised and was not made, but my generation, and certainly my immediate generation of professional colleagues nationally, do not see mesothelioma in the absence of a history of exposure to asbestos.
Long before Alice's exposure to asbestos, the manufacturers knew the danger. This factory inspector's report was the first warning sign. That was in 1898, 84 years ago. By 1906, a British worker reported to his doctor that his team of 10 asbestos workers were all dead, average age 30. By 1931, the link with disease was so clear, the British government passed its first asbestos regulations. They ordered that there should be no asbestos dust in the workplace. By 1935, the link between lung cancer and asbestos became recognised. 14 years after that cancer risk was known, a doctor from America noted that a British company, Cape Asbestos in South Africa, used young children to process raw asbestos by hand. Standing over them, a supervisor with a whip. Even by the age of 12, he discovered several child workers had asbestosis and heart failure. By 1955, Oxford University scientists found that lung cancer among British asbestos workers was 10 times the national average. Smoking increases the lung cancer risk for asbestos workers by 55 times. In addition to lung cancer, by 1960, doctors had established the lethal and once rare form of cancer, mesothelioma, was also caused by asbestos. Finally, in 1969, the accumulation of years of evidence forced the British government to introduce new workplace regulations. In determining what they called a safe dust level, that is how many fibres can be breathed in per hour, they only took into account the risk of asbestosis, not lung cancer or mesothelioma. But as asbestos cancer can take 20 or 30 years to develop, the effects of controlling dust levels can't be seen for several decades. Asbestos has been regulated for over half a century. How many victims have been claimed?
It's been the biggest killer that we know of in the occupational health field. It's killed thousands and thousands of people. Most of the others that we know of have really only killed hundreds. So it is the granddaddy of the occupational health killers. And it's not only affected work people, it's affected their wives, their children, their relatives, and also members of the public, who, because we now know it gives cancer, as opposed to just an asbestos dust clogging of the lungs disease, it kills members of the public who only get very small exposures, or who might only get a small exposure.
That small exposure could come from anywhere. Thousands of tons of asbestos are in pipe insulation. Thousands more are in the roofs and walls of buildings. Asbestos is used in many domestic products, but it wasn't until 1976, 78 years after the first danger sign, that the British industry introduced warning labels on some, but not all of these products. But how effective is that warning?
In the United States, I don't think that this would be considered by any jury to be an adequate warning that the material can cause such diseases as cancer and fatal asbestosis. It says, if you read it carefully, it says, observe the safety rules. It doesn't say this stuff can give you cancer. It says, take care with asbestos. It almost reads like an advertisement that asbestos will take care of you, so use more of it. This is ridiculous as a warning, and it's criminal on the part of the British government that they let this go for a warning in their country.
These spacemen are preparing to remove asbestos from a London housing project. It's such a dangerous job. The men wear masks with a separate oxygen supply and 3 layers of protective clothing, which must be decontaminated after use. In these apartments, asbestos board for insulation is on the walls of 5 rooms, including this child's bedroom. As local residents were the first to realize, any damage to the wall and dangerous dust could be released. Over 6 million tons of asbestos have been put into houses, schools and hospitals all over Britain. Now, this one London borough has 5,000 dwellings to remove asbestos from. It's an expensive job that must be very carefully carried out. This special unit is trained to handle asbestos as if it were radioactive waste. It must be safely buried immediately at a specially licensed site. This extraordinary landscape is in Quebec, Canada. Here, whole townships are dwarfed by the white asbestos mountains. The mines pump out asbestos waste day and night. The locals call it white gold. The Arabs have their oil, they say. We have our asbestos. Several giant American companies, including the Manville Corporation, have dominated this $480 million industry. In addition, a British company, Turner & Newell, for 44 years owned the Bell mine here. Death rates in the asbestos mining towns, say the companies, are no higher than the general population. But what about Lisa Garneau, dead from cancer at 36? As a child, she slid down the giant slag heaps that shadowed her home. Her family still lives beneath the same white mountain. With no alternative jobs, her son is already an asbestos miner, and her daughter plays beneath the same slag heaps. And then there's Roger Jean. He worked for many years at a white asbestos mill. Now he can't even drive a car without oxygen. In 12 years, his unions say they've had more than 1,000 claims from men like him. Yet the Quebec government reported that only 2 out of every 100 workers here suffer from asbestosis like Roger Jean. His union called in a team of scientists from Mount Sinai Hospital, New York, to do an independent study of long-term workers. They found 75 out of 100 workers had lung damage from asbestosis or lung cancer. Paul Formby comments.
Whether it's official or not, they'll minimize the hazard and the suffering of the workers, because obviously this will make it more difficult to sell the product which is hazardous. They have to pay compensation claims, and it's not in their economic interest to say really what the severity of the situation is.
The American research team identified over 700 workers with damaged lungs. Most of them had never been notified. Despite the health danger, mining asbestos means thousands of jobs in Canada. Regardless of Mount Sinai Hospital's findings, the company still wrote in a public relations document we were given in 1982. Asbestos is without a shadow of a doubt one of the safest products on the market today.
I don't want to go down that blue, you know. No. Because if I go down that blue, I've got to come up again, haven't I?
In Yorkshire, Alice is still struggling against her cancer.
That new fence there.
Yeah, all right.
I can't get up that hill.
This is her first day out of bed for 3 weeks.
That hill. I never used to notice that as a hill.
She used to walk miles over the local hills. Now she can only walk with the help of her sister.
Traffic lights there, didn't there? When I first came.
She's tough and realistic, and you can't kid this lady. This lady knows exactly what the score is. She's watched many of her friends and neighbours who have suffered this same disease, and she knows exactly what's happening. And she's doing her best to make sure that her family suffers as little as possible.
Well, Patsy doesn't know. She just knows that I can't pick her up anymore, you know. She's always saying, well, before I went into hospital for that operation, she was just saying, when are you going to have that lump off, Mum, and you'll be able to lift me up and play with me? And now, you know, she just knows I can't pick her up. And, of course, she's too young to tell, but F told me, boy, he's 15, you see. I told him when we were walking along the road one day. I thought it was the best time to tell him then, and you know, he wouldn't cry so much. But he did.
Apart from the victims, the rest of Britain remains largely ignorant of the real dangers of asbestos. It's different in America.
You could be a casualty of World War II and not know it. During the war, one of the materials workers used to build this ship was called asbestos. And after all these years, they found that working around and breathing asbestos may cause bad lung diseases, including cancer.
Millions of people have worked around asbestos dust.
The asbestos epidemic is so big here that the government even televises warnings.
Maybe you worked around asbestos years ago. Maybe you'll get sick, maybe you won't. Don't take any chances.
Would you please rise and salute the flag? I pledge allegiance.
But those warnings came too late for these victims. They're part of an epidemic caused by white and brown asbestos. So this group is called the White Lung Association.
Liberty and justice for all. This dreadful disease does not care about age, or the amount of money you have, or how big you are, or how strong you are. It cuts you down.
It's estimated that 25 million Americans have been exposed to significant amounts of asbestos on the job. This New York hospital is the world's leading center for the study of asbestos disease. Dr. Irving Selikoff's pioneering work uncovered a new problem.
It wasn't asbestos workers, miners or people in factories making these products who were getting these diseases, but these were people who were using asbestos products. Insulation workers never worked in a factory. They were simply using this material, took it out of a box and put it onto boilers and put it onto pipes, mixed cement and plastered things with it and so forth. Well, that raised a whole new set of questions, because for every worker who manufactured a product or mined it, there were more than 100 who used that product. There were millions of people who worked in our shipyards in World War II, 4.5 million. There were millions of people working in our very important construction industry and in a host of other industries that used asbestos products. So that by 1964 we had our really bad news before us.
Dr. Selikoff's team predict that every 58 minutes between now and the end of the century, an American will be killed by asbestos. That's a death toll of nearly 200,000 people. New evidence suggests that these tiny fibers can cause cancer, not just in the lungs, but elsewhere in the body.
We found it in the thyroid gland, which is in the neck. We found it in the brain. We found it in the intestines. We found it in the spleen. We found it in the liver. And so we concluded that asbestos fibers can be carried by way of the bloodstream to different organs in the body.
The National Institute of Occupational Health determined in 1980 there is no evidence for a safe level of asbestos exposure. Even at short exposure periods, 1 day to 3 months, significant disease can occur. This little boy has never seen his father. 5 weeks before he was born, his father died. John Rossi was a Wall Street lawyer. His asbestos exposure was extremely slight. Aged 20, he worked in a warehouse loading asbestos sheets onto trucks for just 2 weeks. But those 2 weeks were enough. At 32, he died of mesothelioma.
I've lost the most important thing in my life. I think it's very lucky when one man and one woman and can somehow find each other and love each other as much as John and I did. We were best friends to each other, laughed a lot, had great plans for our futures together, look forward to growing old together. It was just taken away from me. And from him.
America's most famous mesothelioma victim, Steve McQueen. Exposed to asbestos as a Marine and in some of his films, he tried every treatment his money could buy. In a Mexican clinic, he recorded this tape.
Congratulations to your wonderful country on the magnificent work that the Mexican doctors, assisted by the American doctors, are doing at the Playa Santa Maria Hospital and helping in my recovery from cancer. And thank you for helping to save my life. God bless you all. Steve McQueen.
Soon after this statement was recorded, Steve McQueen died. Don Carson is a truck mechanic. At work, he used to blow the white asbestos dust out of brake drums when he was changing the linings. During school vacations, his sons used to help him.
How's yours?
In 1980, When his eldest boy, Johnny, was 11, his parents were told their son had the asbestos cancer, mesothelioma.
Oh, I really went to pieces. And so did John. I think we just looked at each other, and John said, "Why me?" And I couldn't answer him. And I called Don, and I told him that they were malignant, and he just went to pieces too. You know, this always happens to somebody else. It's not going to happen to you. You know, that was, and I think we're really happy. Is you know, when I was told what it was, I knew it was incurable because they had told us that. There wasn't anything we could do. We had to sit and watch our son die and not be able to stop it.
I never had anything hurt so bad in my life. John could do 50 push-ups last summer. And then just before he died, he couldn't even lift his foot back up on the wheelchair. And that just killed me because he was so athletic.
We watched especially his arms and legs. They shrunk to just nothing. There was no muscle left. If you went to touch him, it was very painful because all there was bone. I couldn't hug him. If you hugged him, it hurt. Couldn't hold his hand. You couldn't sit next to him. You tried. And he'd be quiet about it, but you knew it hurt. Just hurt him to even just hug him. There was nothing left.
On April the 13th, 1981, John Carson had a small party at his home. That night, he died in his sleep. He was 12 years old.
Just for one day, I'd like those asbestos manufacturers to have the pain, to have the cancer for one day, just to watch him. And I can guarantee they'd never do it again.
For 18 months, Tony Richards blew out brake drums daily, just like John Carson's dad used to. Thousands of British and American mechanics do the same.
That's the way I was showed in the garage when I first started out. That's the way they showed me to do it. Just blow it out with an airline.
Are you worried about your own health at all from blowing up brake drums?
Well, not really. I don't really know what it does to you, so I'm not really worried about it. If I knew what it can affect you, then obviously I'd take a bit more care, but I've never really read what it does to you. All it does, it says a warning on the packet, it can damage your health, but that's as far as it goes.
Overgate Hospice, Yorkshire. Alice has been moved here for treatment to ease her intense pain. The doctors gave her 6 months to live, and already she survived for 1 month beyond that. Alice has now requested compensation from her former employer. She's certain her cancer is due to their failure to provide safe working conditions. Throughout Britain, there are 800 workplaces using asbestos, 32 of them large factories. It's a multi-million-dollar industry. To promote asbestos, the industry produces a steady supply of glossy brochures. In 1976, nationwide advertising like this cost them over $2 million. Turner & Newell which has several American subsidiaries, the most powerful company in the industry. Gross income, $995 million. This is their Rochdale factory, the biggest asbestos textile plant in Europe. It was here that Samuel Turner began using asbestos 103 years ago. Turner's prides itself on its pioneering work in health and safety. In 1920, they said, "The workshop shall be as a sanctuary to which men shall enter with joy in their hearts and laughter in their eyes." Refused permission to film inside, we stopped workers and asked them how much they knew about asbestos disease. Turners are clear. All workers are fully informed.
Do you know what diseases you can get from asbestos?
I don't know, to be honest with you.
Do you know what diseases you can get from
Oh,
asbestos?
I do, yes.
Well, can you tell me what they are?
Asbestosis, for one.
Have you ever heard of mesothelioma?
I've heard of it, yes.
Do you know what it is?
A very chronic chest complaint.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
It's cancer. Do you know? Did you know that?
For 50 years, Turner's has been Britain's showpiece asbestos factory. Since the 1920s, every investigation into asbestos disease, not just in Britain, but also in the United States, has depended upon evidence from here. The latest report came from the government's 1977 Asbestos Commission, which was concerned with the increasing death rate in British factories. Evidence from Turner's model factory was central in the conclusions of the final government report, published 2 years later. Turner's are proud of the cleanliness in this factory. Thousands of dollars have been spent on equipment, the monitoring of the asbestos dust, and the regular medical checkups seem impressive. In 1978, Turners were very confident of conditions inside the factory. They told their unions, "It's extremely unlikely that anyone commencing work at TBA will have his health affected at all." However, scientists from Oxford University predict that after a lifetime's work here, the number of these workers who will die of mesothelioma, lung cancer, or chest disease may be as high as 1 out of 10. Turners also told the Asbestos Commission that in the weaving shed, which for 30 years has kept to below the legal limits for asbestos dust, they had no disease whatsoever, that not one single weaver has contracted asbestos-related disease. But what about this man who worked in the weaving shed? Records show he had suspected asbestosis fully 8.5 years before Turner stated to the Commission that they had no disease at all among weavers. He wasn't the only one, as these records from that same year, 1977, show. The number of weavers with suspected asbestosis? 13. Turner's also stated that they had 48 cases of mesothelioma, but that none of these could be described as cases of slight exposure to asbestos. Margaret Crimes worked here as Turner's receptionist. Emma Marshall was Turner's office cleaner. They both died of mesothelioma. This is Turner's own company list of mesotheliomas. Among them, the exposure times, 16 months, 1 year, 7 months, 5 months, 3 years, and the last one, a woman exposed for just 10 days. In this union-sponsored questionnaire, Turner said the number of mesotheliomas in the previous 4 years was just 3. By examining the death certificates in the same period, we found 6. Turner's also told the unions at the same time the level of asbestosis between 1950 and 1979 was just 20. We found 81. We looked at another of Turner's factories, Glasgow. For nearly 40 years, Turner's dumped waste asbestos into a huge hole at their factory here. Children could easily get into the 18-acre site. Tons of asbestos slid into the River Clyde. In 1981, at public expense, the huge tip was properly covered. The job was so dangerous that workmen had to wear full protective clothing.
I'm on record as calling it a biological bomb, and that's sincerely what I believe it to be. It's a long-term health hazard, and this has been blowing about asbestos just in this area for very many years. And the results of that, I'm quite certain, will lead to deaths no one knows how many in the coming years. This is a sort of tragic memorial to my mind for the future. This site has now just got to stay sterile for eternity, as far as I can see, and that's what Turners have left to Clydebank.
And what kind of legacy has Turners left overseas? Turner & Newell is a huge multinational with asbestos interests in over 20 different countries. Are the conditions there up to British standards? In India, Turners have interests in 5 factories. This is Bombay. As health regulations have tightened at home, Western asbestos companies have moved into the third world. This Indian factory was opened by Turners in the 1930s, a few years after the first regulations were introduced into Britain. It may have seemed benign paternalism then to build housing and schools within the factory compound. Now we know that for young children to live next door to a factory must be highly dangerous. But in 1982, they still do. Particularly dangerous when just a few yards down from the school and houses, we found piles of scattered asbestos waste open to any adventurous child. One X-ray study here showed that 352 men, that's well over 1 in 3 workers, had some form of asbestosis. This little boy is playing on a pile of asbestos waste in front of an American-owned factory. At a recent conference, an industry executive stated, "The third world provides a rosy glow in the industry's crystal ball." After months of waiting, Alice has finally received a small offer of compensation from Cape Asbestos.
I was really insulted because they don't know how I feel. And you know, for a week of this pain, what they offered me wouldn't compensate. It wouldn't. And they offered me 13,000. And I mean, my husband's 65. And how long is he going to be here? And you know, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, I wouldn't, honest. Not this. It's... I don't know. Yeah, you said, what do I think about Kate? I hate him. Oh, I bloody hate him. I don't know why I hate though, do I? Because Kate's just a word.
Leeds High Court. Alice must go to court in person to convince the judge she's entitled to a more generous settlement.
Well, I don't think I should have had to do it in the first place. Not at this time or any other time, because, and especially this morning, because I've had a right rough night. And I've had 3 right rough nights. I've been walking the floor like I used to do with a baby. It hurts that much. I'm going into hospital tomorrow, by the way.
Today?
Today, when I've been here. So, I'm hoping they'll be able to do something.
However much compensation you get today, is it any compensation at all really for you?
Well, what good is it now? It's no good now, is it? It's no good at all. Not as far as I'm concerned.
In Britain, most asbestos victims do not go to court. But in America, the courtroom has become the centre of the asbestos controversy. A wealthy suburb of St. Louis, Missouri. An asbestos widow, Dana Bond, sued the manufacturer of a product her husband had once used. Richard Bond had worked for just a few months with asbestos, using a process invented by Turner & Newell, exported to America. 16 years later, this healthy, fit man developed mesothelioma. His lawyers recorded this tape.
Are you suffering a particular illness at this time, sir? Do you understand what it is or what they call it?
Asbestosis.
Asbestosis and mesothelioma.
3 days after this testimony was taken, Richard Bond died, aged 32. Turners and their American partners made legal history when they paid his widow $1,400,000 in compensation. But even in America, sums that large are highly unusual. Ron Motley is one of the lawyers representing asbestos claimants in the United States.
The asbestos companies and their insurers are bemoaning the fates and saying we're going to go bankrupt, something's got to be done. Well, it's my opinion they ought to go bankrupt. And I will personally be delighted if every asbestos company in the United States goes bankrupt and every one of their insurance carriers suffers a loss, because it was the asbestos companies and their insurance companies who had the knowledge and could have stopped this epidemic of death and disease that we have in the United States from the sale of asbestos fibers. They knew. An insurance company in the United States as early as 1918 refused to insure people exposed to asbestos because they knew it caused harm. And for 50 to 60 years, with this knowledge, they kept selling it and didn't tell people. So anything that happens to the asbestos companies, they deserve. If they go bankrupt, they deserve it.
Overgate Hospice, Yorkshire, England. Once again, Alice has been moved in here. She seems to be improving. News of her court case against Cape has come through.
What did you say when you heard about your settlement in court?
Well, a bit upset, really. Because you don't come to realise until you get a settlement made and realise what it is they're making it on. And when my husband come to me, he says, what did you say? 36,000, and I says, well, it's a new body I want. And £36,000 won't buy that. You just can't give in, can you? You owe it to yourself and to your family to keep fighting, don't you? And when you get knocked down, get up and stand there again. And then have another go at you. You've got to have something, haven't you? I mean, just because we worked to that mill all them years ago doesn't mean to say we can't fight back. Is it? So... And that's the sort of people mill workers are around here. They all fight back. Well, they try to do, you know, but when you're dead you can't, can you? So you might as well struggle on while you're alive. Do your fighting then. So... just have to keep going on and putting up with it, the pain and everything.
A few weeks later, Alice died in her sleep. She was just 48. Last year, worldwide asbestos output rose by 2.4%. As third world demand increases, output is expected to double by the end of the century. In 1982, Turner & Newell publicly stated, much of the steam has gone out of the anti-asbestos lobby. There is not that much concern in the United Kingdom. 3 months before broadcast, we asked Turner & Newell to answer the serious questions raised in this film. Later, we repeated the offer. Negotiations were not complete when its programme was finalised. When this film was shown in Britain in July 1982, the impact was enormous. Thousands of viewers wrote to us, deeply moved by Alice's story, wanting to help her family and the other victims of asbestos disease. Asbestos workers went on strike against their employers to improve their working conditions. Members of Parliament challenged the validity of the current regulations governing the use of asbestos. And millions of dollars were wiped off the stock exchange value of the large asbestos companies. One of the main concerns today is with the 30 million tons of asbestos already in place. It's widely used in the construction industry. Up until 1973, it was sprayed on steel supports, like these in the World Trade Center. Asbestos provides insulation and fireproofing in thousands of buildings across the country. Workers were exposed during construction. Now every time maintenance or repair work is done, asbestos can get into the air. Whole communities are exposed whenever old buildings are demolished. Thousands of workplaces, like this police station, are no longer safe. With increasing awareness have come efforts to remove or seal off the asbestos in thousands of public buildings. Only 2 decades ago, asbestos were required for fire protection in schools. Today, the EPA has ordered an investigation to potential health hazards of more than 100,000 schools across America. Loose fibers are dangerous when inhaled, so some schools, like Newton North High in Massachusetts, spent nearly $1 million eliminating their asbestos hazard. Asbestos removal is costly. Without some financial assistance, for most schools, such removal is impossible. In 1970, the US government passed the Occupational Safety and Health Act. OSHA's first priority was to regulate asbestos use in the workplace. Relying largely on British evidence, they determined that it was safe to inhale 2 fibers per cubic milliliter of air each hour. But can there really be a safe level of exposure to asbestos?
A man who works inhales somewhere around a cubic meter of air, which is 1,000,000 milliliters. So that if you allow him to breathe in 2 fibers per milliliter, you're saying that you can breathe in 2 million fibers each hour.
In addition, millions of smaller ones, which escape detection by the monitoring equipment, are also inhaled. These fibers are surrounded by tissue and magnified 16,000 times. Research shows that even the smallest fibers can cause cancer.
The 2-fiber standard is, among scientists, widely known to be unsafe. And here we are. People are being allowed to work in circumstances in which they're breathing in a great deal of asbestos. Not like 30 years ago, not like 20 years ago, but still much more than we could do away with at the present time.
The British government, within a week of the broadcast of this film, decided to officially reduce their 2-fiber standard by half. In 1984, the level will probably be reduced even further. The public debate in America is still about the past. Who will pay for this monumental tragedy? How will these victims be compensated? And who will take the responsibility? While this controversy dominates newspapers and courtrooms, a small experiment is underway in central Pennsylvania. Port Allegheny was a typical rural town until an asbestos insulation manufacturing plant began operation. 1,100 workers were exposed to varying amounts of asbestos between 1964 and 1972, the 8 years the plant was open. In 1973, the Factory Workers Union, concerned about the lives of its members, alerted Pittsburgh Corning to the seriousness of the problem. After 4 years of tough negotiations, Pittsburgh Corning finally agreed to pay for the first years the comprehensive medical surveillance program. The Port Allegheny Asbestos Health Program is the only one of its kind in the country. From this office, eligible workers are tracked down, enrolled in the program, where their health care is carefully monitored. Family members whose exposure came from dust brought into the home are also examined.
Asbestos Health Program is a fiancé.
Under the direction of a community board, the union and the company work together for the success of the health program. The emphasis is on preventive health care, designed to detect disease like lung cancer in its early stages. Because prolonged exposure to asbestos damages the lungs, doctors listen for the first indication of breathing difficulties.
Normal breathing to start out.
Participants are regularly put through a battery of tests. Most look for early signs of cancer. This pulmonary function test measures lung capacity.
Push, push, push. Okay.
Kim Klein is at risk because he worked near asbestos and he smoked cigarettes.
You worked for the whole summer of '69?
Yes.
If he continues to smoke, his chances of getting lung cancer are 55 times greater than non-smokers.
Sounds to me like you're a person who can try and quit. So I encourage you to try and do that again, and we'll help you if you want us to try.
The program can alert people to their health problems. But whether or not medical surveillance can actually prolong anyone's life is still open to debate. The commitment to this health program by a company that has thousands of lawsuits against it puts Pittsburgh Corning in contrast to the largest asbestos manufacturing company in the United States.
Manville Corporation's Board of Directors has determined that the corporation should file for reorganization under Chapter 11 of the Bankruptcy Act. Though our businesses are in good shape despite the recession, we are completely overwhelmed by the cost of the asbestos health lawsuits filed against us. A recent study estimates that these may ultimately total about $52,000 and cost more than $2 billion. The Chapter 11 action might not have been necessary if the government had accepted financial responsibility for its role in causing much of the disease.
The bulk of the lawsuits now filed against Manville are from World War II shipyard workers and their families. Manville complied with the government's specific request for asbestos and now believes the government must shoulder some of the burden of these health claims. Manville has become one of the most sued companies in history. 500 lawsuits were being filed against it each month. Professor Lawrence Bacow.
Once reorganization has been filed for under Chapter 11, basically all the lawsuits come to a halt. Nobody gets paid. In effect, Manville was throwing the ball back in the court of the federal government, giving the responsibility to a federal judge to determine who would get paid and how much, and at the same time also putting some pressure on Congress to try and figure out a way to pay all these claims and, at least from Manville's perspective, hopefully bail them out.
Chapter 11 allows Manville to continue business as usual. At the same time, they're lobbying for the establishment of a federal compensation fund. There are several bills pending now in Congress. Manville is behind a government-industry 50-50 plan. However, Professor Bacow believes industry should pay for a hefty share.
If government steps in and takes responsibility for paying off all these claims, I think industry will get the wrong message. If industry has to pay, then the cost of those payments to workers ultimately will be incorporated in the price of the products. As a result, the price of the products will be higher than they would otherwise. This will give industry an incentive to minimize the risks. It will give industry an incentive to look for alternative products which don't create risks. It will give industry an incentive to do research which can try and avoid these problems in the first place.
The tragic story of asbestos should be a warning to us all, a lesson that we should prevent a similar disaster from ever happening again. Meanwhile, the price we've paid for that bitter lesson has been high, paid for in the lives of ordinary people like Alice, who just went to work every day believing it was safe. Ordinary people from all over the world. The decisions we make today will be the legacy we leave to our children and to our children's children.